Hi, everybody. This is Ann Osbourn with MSA Safety. I am the Fall Protection Marketing Manager for North America at MSA. And I just want to thank the MBA for allowing us to come on here and provide this educational information around self-retracting devices. There's some updates from ANSI as far as design for self-retracting devices that is going into effect in 2022. So that's what I'm going to be reviewing today during this webinar. We're going to talk about the major changes and how it impacts those who use self-retracting lifelines, also known as self-retracting devices. So today, real quickly, we will go through some of the new types and classifications for SRDs. We'll talk about some changes that you might see on the labeling starting in 2022, and then some of the other additions that ANSI is requiring fall protection manufacturers to include with their SRDs or SRLs. So getting right into it, one of the first key differences in the new ANSI Z359.14 standard for self-retracting devices is about the various types of SRDs. So previously, in the last standard revision in 2014, people were very familiar with a type SRL, a type SRL-LE, or a type SRL-R. Big difference would be a type SRL was a standard overhead use SRL, and an SRL-LE would be a type that was rated for leading edge applications, and the SRL-R is for standard rescue functionality. So if you're working in confined space, the SRLs that you mount to a tripod or some type of confined space setup there. Those were not required to be on the label, but some manufacturers do put them on the label, which is why it's important to cover, because you might notice that. Moving forward into the 2021 revision of the standard, ANSI is changing up those types a little bit. Still 3 types, but instead of SRL and SRL-LE, they're bringing those together into one type called SRL. And that is going to mean any type of SRL for non-back mounted, so meaning it's SRLs that are longer lengths, the ones that you wouldn't wear on your back, for both standard overhead applications or leading edge applications. And then they added this new classification or type called SRL-P. P stands for personal. So now there is a type for personal fall limiters. We call them PFLs sometimes, or minis is a pretty common term. Those are back mounted, meaning you wear them on your back, the worker wears it on their back, and it can also be, an SRL-P can be for both overhead and lower level tie-off or leading edge use. And then the SRL-R type remains the same. So why do you need to know this? Like I said, manufacturers don't necessarily have to put the type on the label. The type is really about telling the manufacturer how they should be testing their products during design. So personal fall limiters are now getting a slightly different test than maybe longer length SRLs. So again, this is really just to notify the manufacturers how they should be testing the product based on what type it is. And you may see these types referenced on the label, so it's just kind of an awareness or good to know. The next change that will impact you, and that will be very noticeable, are the SRD classes. So in the 2014 standard, I think everyone is very familiar with Class A, Class B. Class A SRLs were SRLs that had a max arrest distance of 24 inches or less, and Class B were SRLs that have a max arrest distance of 54 inches or less. Class A and Class B are no longer in the new standard revision. So instead of talking about the classes in terms of max arrest distance, instead ANSI is going to something a little bit different. It's going to be called Class 1 and Class 2, and it's going to be about tie-off points instead of max arrest distance. So Class 1 SRDs or SRLs are going to be rated for anchoring at or above the D-ring, and Class 2 SRLs are for anchoring above or below the D-ring and are rated for leading edge applications. So it's very clean and easy moving forward to know whether or not your product is rated for leading edge. Class 1 is not leading edge, it's only okay for tie-off above the dorsal D-ring, and Class 2 SRLs are okay for both above and below the D-ring tie-off and for leading edge applications. So it's very distinct now whether your product is rated for leading edge or not. Only Class 2 SRLs are for leading edge. So just to give you some quick examples here of what these products look like in the future as far as labeling. So over here, the first SRD I have, this is a traditional 30-foot self-retracting Lifeline. Is not rated for leading edge. It's really meant for overhead tie-off, let's say something like ladder climbing. So when this new standard goes into effect, this would be labeled as an SRL Class 1. In the middle here, I have an example of a personal fall limiter, a leading edge personal fall limiter. It is worn on the back. And this would be something now classified as an SRLP because it's personal, whereas worn on the back, and a Class 2 because it's rated for leading edge and is okay for lower level tie-off. And then the third option, this is what I talked about. This is that rescuer type SRL that you would mount to a tripod or some type of confined space system. That would be an SRL-R Class 1 because this product is not rated for leading edge. Some additional changes, as far as when you start seeing products labeled to the new standard, the SRLs must have a label. It will look just like this, whether it's rated Class 1 or Class 2. The Class 1 label will be a white square, the Class 2 label will be a black square. It will be very visible and it must be on the SRL. Additionally, ANSI has some requirements for Class 2 SRLs as far as adding some clearance charts to the product itself. So now, not only will you have clearance charts in the user manual, but there will be some type of clearance chart for Class 2 SRLs on the SRL housing itself. Now, ANSI isn't dictating the exact format for these clearance charts. It's really up to the manufacturer. They just have to have some type of label or pictogram or visual showing clearances and position on a working surface. So that is a very new change that you'll start seeing in 2022. Additionally, one of the third major requirements for manufacturers under this new standard that you will notice is the addition of a warning card. And this warning card, this orange card that you can see here on the slide, you can read through that on your own, but really this is a requirement for all Class 2 SRLs to have in the box. And this is not necessarily an MSA requirement, this is an ANSI requirement. And the intent of this warning card is really to remind everyone that leading edge products are not completely invincible and they do have limitations and they must be used in accordance with manufacturers' instructions. So it's a good reminder of that. It's also, there that the card really does intend to emphasize the hierarchy of controls. When it comes to fall protection, meaning, you should really try and utilize an overhead anchor system or anchor point when possible versus, tying off at foot level if you can. So this warning card the intent is really just to remind people of those limitations and to really think through their application before using a Class 2 SRL. And then, finally, where do we go next? If you're really passionate about ANSI and the development of product standards when it comes to fall protection, ANSI is voluntary and it is open to anyone for attendance. So if you're very passionate about that as a user of self-retracting devices, if you Google ASSP ANSI Z359.14, you can always sit in on those committees and provide feedback. They love to hear from end users. But in the future, I think we'll really be, looking towards, leading edge and those Class 2 SRLs and various types of testing for all the different materials that are out there for leading edge. As we know right now, the leading edge test for ANSI is on a steel edge, and there's many more applications out there, such as concrete, decking, etc., that we need to look into and be aware of. So that's maybe the future of SRLs when it comes to ANSI, and that standard, or the new SRD standard, goes into effect on August 1, 2022, which means that manufacturers have to start building to that standard as of August 1, 2022. Anything that you've purchased or have in use that is labeled to the old standard is perfectly acceptable for use and is grandfathered in. So with that, I'd like to thank the MBA again for this opportunity. And if you have questions or want to learn more about this, you can contact me directly or MSA at 1-800-672-2222. Thank you.